Hello Summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathan Ng, and today we're going to be talking about how to win without a front line. Even if your team is ahead in the early game, you have a lot to do before you can close out the game, and it's not always as easy as running at the other team. This is especially true when you lack tanks to start up fights and serve as a wall to keep you alive in those fights. But that doesn't mean it's impossible, and we're here to talk about some alternative ways to play around that draft error. First up, let's talk about how we end up with no front line. Generally speaking, when building a team comp, you want to have little boxes checked off. Things like wave clear, mix of physical and magical damage, engage and disengage, etc. Each role tends to lean towards a certain checkbox more than others, but there is of course some overlap. Generally speaking, the most common champions that are tanky enough to frontline come from top, jungle, and support. But to some people, it's not fun being that tanky engage for your team fight, since a lot of the game is resident sleeper while you're waiting for the next objective. Think about it from a top laner's perspective. As OP as he is, it's not exactly a thrill to play Malphite all the time, since your main job is to flash ults every 5 minutes or just ults every 1 minute. Compare that to flashy champions like Camille and Riven with all their mobility, outplay potential, and obscene amount of damage and skill expression. In the jungle, you have a similar situation. Skarner has a huge win rate for a long time, but he's just not exciting for most people, when things like Lee Sin, Graves, Hecarim, and Kha'Zix exist. For supports, engaged champions are more fun in my opinion, but at the same time, they are harder to execute. So many people gravitate to the easier to play enchanters. That way you could keep your ADC alive instead of forcing them to kind of go in with you, because, how many people can you trust in solo queue anyway? At the end of the day, solo queue players just want to enjoy their games, and while I personally think it's more fun to win, and I'm the type of player to pick for the better comp, not everyone is, and that's okay. And that brings us to today's question of the day. How do you decide what champion to pick? Some people are dedicated one-tricks, some play for their own team comp, others pick to counter their matchup, and sometimes you just pick on a whim, locking in Riven for the first time in my promos. Let us know what category you fall into in the comments down below. And if you fall into the last one, I'm still looking for you. That game really hurt. Now let's go ahead and go back on topic and talk about some workarounds when you're lacking a frontline. The first option that we have is winning by split pushing. This strategy is possibly the easiest and consistent to execute in solo queue, as long as you have a few basic requirements. First, you need to have a strong duelist that is farmed and fed enough to win in a side lane, preferably enough so they could go ahead and win 1v2s and even 1v3s if the enemy team rotates over. There are a ton of champions that fall into this category, but just to name a few, you have Fiora, Tryndamere, Yorick, and Camille. It doesn't always have to be the top laners. Mid laners like Cass and Echo are mobile and take towers incredibly quickly. Vayne can also duel pretty much any champion in the game as long as they have the mechanics for it. The second thing that you need to pull this off is strong wave clear. Even if your split pusher is so strong that they can go ahead and dive the person matching them under tower, it doesn't mean anything if the enemy team can rail your turrets. Do we have to say rail? It doesn't matter, since their entire team will push down structures much faster than your lone side laner. You need to be able to kill the minions before they can go ahead and stack up on the tower. A lot of champions can clear waves fast, but you want to make sure that you're doing it from range to minimize the risk of getting caught out. For that reason, the best champs for this are going to be the long-range control mages like Ziggs, Anivia, Orianna, and Syndra. All of these champions can quickly melt waves and have some form of deterrence to some of the enemy teammates from just going in for the dive. The last thing that you need to solve the game out with your split pushers is go for a win in the form of a disengage. This isn't quite as mandatory as the other 2 points, but it can definitely help out a lot if you have no way to stop a fight before it really happens and if the team has hard engage. Even with all the wave clear in the world, as the game goes on, tanks get beefy enough to force dives under turrets, and it might really help out in some way to make their team back off. Disengage can come from champs in all roles, but it's generally found in champs that have AoE ultimates and CC. Varus, Zara, and Gragas all have ults that can go ahead and stop a dive in its tracks, while Alistar and Thresh can peel the entire team with their abilities. So, once you have those things checked off, the weight of the game falls on the side laner's shoulder. He'll win via trading objectives almost like a game of chess. If their team pushes top lane, you want to hold onto turret, sawing waves as long as you can. Ideally, by the time they take 1 turret, your split pusher has taken 2. When their team goes for dragon, your teammate takes a tower top. Eventually, even leaving their base to push 1 lane means that the enemy team is risking losing an inhib. This constant pressure will lead to sloppy rotations by the enemy team and put them in spots where they're pressured to make a play and force overly hard to get something done. This just leads them to falling apart at the seams, making bad dives and even worse Baron calls. The best way to support your side laner is to secure vision in the enemy jungle. Every time your side laner does get caught, the other team has time to shove the waves out and potentially force fights at Baron, since they don't really have the threat of losing their base while they set up and force you to stop them. It's also super important that you play safely while your teammate split pushes, especially when you're the wave clear on the team. The second you get caught, all the pressure that your team is exerting is gone, and the enemy team can go ahead and pick up momentum and start taking control of the map back. If you want to learn about the different types of strategies and tips that you can win more games, head over to ProGuides.com. With a subscription, you can go ahead and get access to all of our courses, unlimited chats with our coaches, and discounted rates if you decide to hit up one for a session. And there's no better time than now to sign up, because we're running a pretty great deal. Now until the end of the month, you can use a discount code RANKUP2021 for 20% off your sub. But, let's get back to the video, shall we? The second way to circumvent having no frontliner is to play for picks. Whether it's using CC to catch an opponent out and just jump on them, or just using a lot of burst damage from a major assassin to blow someone up, the idea is to delete a champion and keep them in a constant state of a 4v5, which just leads to easily won objective fights and even more kills if they're trying to contest. This style of winning is much less comp dependent than the split pushing method, but some champs definitely make it easier than others. You have things like Ashe ults for the instant go button and Blitzcrank hooks to fish for hooks over walls. Maybe you're a lone wolf type of player, and instead of CCing your opponents for your teammates, you want to do all the work yourself. In that case, you want to play anti-fun mages and assassins like Syndra, Annie, Zed, and Kha'Zix that exist to ruin the lives of ADCs everywhere. The key to winning this playstyle is totally control vision. Sweepers and pink wards are your best friends. If you ever played support, then you know the feeling of being afraid to face check river. Even if you know there's a good chance that they're cheesing, you can't totally concede the map to the enemy team. That's the feeling that you should be instilling in the enemy team when you're playing for picks. Walking through their own jungle should feel like going through a haunted house. They just don't know where or when it will happen, but they will know that at some point, something's gonna jump out at them and send them back to the fountain. Like the split pushing method, this game is super reliant on not giving up pressure. To make picks, you have to control vision. And if you're stuck playing off the back foot, it can be really hard to leave your base, much less black out the map for the enemy team. But when you are in control, you want to make sure something happens every time you get a kill. Whether it's taking a tower, counter jungling, or just setting up more vision, each kill should lead to the next. Sometimes when I'm playing something like Kha'Zix or Rengar, I'll just go ahead and pick up one kill and just wait outside the enemy base near red buff and wait for them to come back and then send them back again. There's nothing quite as tilting as dying back to back and spending a full minute and a half not getting to play the game. Which makes a lot of sense because I don't know why, but ADCs just spend 30 minutes not playing the game. But hey, I guess that's just personal preference. The third method for winning with no frontline is to poke and kite to win. To pull off wins like this, as the name of the method suggests, you need champions with poke and preferably some disengage to ensure that a fight never actually happens. When I say you need poke, I mean a heavy-hitting, consistent kind. Sure, Janet might be annoying in the laning phase with her W spam, but outside of lane, she'll be dead in a second if you move up to W the opponent. For these types of comps, you want casters that can send you back to the base by hitting just a couple of spells. Ziggs and Xerath are two mages that can go ahead and poke super well, while also clearing out waves, giving you some nice overlap as stallers in case you have a splitting teammate. Lux can poke and has great wave clear, and if you land a Q, it overlaps with the previous method of letting you get picks. Jace has some insanely hard-hitting poke, with just a single empowered Q easily doing more than half of a squishy target's HP. The new Ezreal build lets him poke harder than ever, and thanks to his E, he'll be extremely hard to lock down even with hard engage on the other team. And if you guys are curious on what that Ezreal build is, you can go ahead and check out our other videos, or I could just go ahead and tell you that it involves Duskblade and Essence Reaver. Anyway, you can go ahead and find some supports that also fall into this category. Zyra and Vel'Koz offer a ton of poke and have ultimates that can easily melt a team that gets impatient and forces a bad fight. Zyra in particular is a strong pick with the poke comp since her E and ultimate are massive disengage tools as well. The idea is to never actually take a fight if you don't have to. Instead, you want to poke out the enemy team so much that they can never start a team fight in the first place. If they try to engage, you can go ahead and disengage and kite things out until they're just too low to continue. In the end, they actually have to go back to the base and heal up, and you'll be able to take objectives as if they actually did die. Once the game starts going on and you can go ahead and take more and more towers, you'll be able to put a lot of pressure and effort into controlling vision in the enemy jungle. The idea is that anytime they try to come and get the wards down, you can go ahead and send out a barrage of pokes. This makes it very hard for them to even leave their base and get vision down on their own jungle, much less around Baron and Dragon. Without the ability to scout the map, they'll never know when you're faking Baron and when you're actually doing it. And as we all know, faking it only hurts the relationship. Sometimes you have to fight, so when you do, we have our fourth way to win games with no frontline, skirmishing. If you don't know what that word means, it's basically fighting on a smaller scale. It's just kind of like 2v2ing or 3v3ing on smaller objectives. But this skirmishing style doesn't have to be an early game only strat. Some champions in League are insanely OP in 5v5s, but lacks the kit to take the scrappier skirmishes. Let's compare two ADCs in Jinx and Lucian. With Jinx's high range, potential for massive AoE and damage, and resets from her passive, she can be a fearsome hyper carry in the late game fights. Then we have Lucian. While most people think that Lucian falls off, his single target DPS is actually insane. It's just that his short range makes it harder to reach priority targets. In a 5v5, Jinx is going to pump out more damage and carry a lot harder with proper peel. But in a 2v2 or a 3v3 where she doesn't have the entire team to set her up, Lucian can go ahead and get on Jinx and take her out. And trust me, I wish I was Lucian because I really want to take Jinx out. She's just my league crush, you know? Which probably explains a lot. There are a ton of instances of this that we can go over, but the best champions for this are the ones that have the mobility to go in and force skirmishes hard, and end it before the enemy team has a chance to group up. Camille, Rek'Sai, and Ryze are all some of the champions that excel in smaller number-based fights. As far as bot laners go, most marksmen are out of luck since they're susceptible to being blown up in fights like this, but not all hope is lost. As I mentioned earlier, Lucian is pretty self-sufficient, and Kalista is actually more of a duelist than some bruisers, like in TFT. And with the correct gun setup, namely the Severum and Chakram, Aphelios can be pretty dangerous to tango with. The name of the game here is to divide and conquer. You'll want to use good rotations to force your opponents into a spot where they have to fight you. This method works really well in conjunction with the split pushing strat that we already went over. Let's use a little scenario to give you an idea of how this works. Like I mentioned with Lucian, many champions don't actually fall off in terms of damage. It's just that it gets much more difficult for them to actually apply that damage in a 5v5 fight. As a result, champions like Rek'Sai, Garen, and Renekton are often transitioning into tankier builds, so they can at least survive and serve as meat shields in fights. But if you build them to deal damage and take smaller scale fights, you'll be sure that you can go ahead and tear through your opponents. And that's how you can win games without a frontline. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to sub so you never miss out on content such as this. Remember to let us know how you decide what champion that you want to play down in the comments down below. And one last thing, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description as well, where you can go ahead and discuss League further or just hang out and be a part of the community. I can't wait to see you guys all back in the next video or in the Discord, but until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day.